Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Caroline and I'm the membership manager here with the Digital Marketing Institute. Today we're going to be talking all things big data and new mindsets and how you can use these two power tools to harness the strengths to unlock the success for your banking business. So I'm joined by Richard, who is our Learning and Transformation Specialist for our corporate division here, who is going to be facilitating today's webinar. Also joining us is Jonathan, who is the founder of Love Experience, and Sadir, who is a digital transformation expert. So I just, before we kick off, want to actually draw your attention to a few different things here that will help you throughout this webinar. So firstly, on the right hand side of your screen, you're going to see a question box. So this is what we're going to be having a dedicated Q&A section towards the end of this webinar. So this is where you're going to be popping in all those questions, and don't keep your questions to the very end. We want to pop them in as you think of them so that we can try and get through as many as possible when we get to that Q&A section. We also have a large number of participants joining us for this webinar today. So we'd love to see you pop in your name there and where you're from, and we'll be sure to give you a shout out. So you're going to see that shout out in the next box that I want to draw your attention to, which is the chat box, just below the question box on the right hand side. And that's going to allow you to see any comments that are coming through that we're sharing throughout this webinar. The other thing is you'll see there's a grey line just along the top of your screen, just below the box that is showing all our profile pictures here. And that there's three little lines there, and that will allow you to move the screen size about so that you can have more of us or less of us, depending on where you want to focus your attention. And of course, if you want to increase the screen size as well. Then the other thing that I wanted to bring attention to was for anybody who is a CPD member with the Digital Marketing Institute, then you will be getting 1 CPD credit for attending this webinar, and we'll make sure that that's automatically applied to your CPD record. Now, we're planning on this being quite an interactive presentation today, so we've got a number of polls that will be launched throughout this webinar, and I'm going to kick things off here with the first poll, and we'll test your quick response skills here. So at the DMI we have a skills test which looks at how you would place yourself as an industry benchmark for your digital skills. So I'm going to launch a poll here now, and if you're interested in us sending this digital skills out to you, just select yes or no. So this should be coming up on your screen now. We'll just leave it sit for a couple of seconds, and this is the same as you're going to see as we launch the 2 other polls later on. And just select yes if you would like us to send out the skills test to you after the webinar, or no if it's something that you're not interested in at this time. Thank you for your voting, and I'm going to close that now so you'll see us come back onto your screen. Now the common question that everybody asks are these sessions going to be recorded, and are we going to get a copy? So I am delighted to say that yes, this session is being recorded, and yes, you will be sent out a copy of the webinar today. Also, we'll be putting this up on our membership platform, so you'll be able to access the webinar and the slide decks as well there within the next 48 hours or so. And I'll pop a link into that chat box now shortly. So if you aren't a member of ourselves, you'll be able to sign up and register a free member account to get access to this webinar and slides. So that's the housekeeping covered, and I've got we're going to start the presentation now. So myself and Sadir, who'll be joining later on in the presentation, are going to drop off now as we hand over to Richard and Jonathan, and then I'll pop back on whenever we go to that Q&A section. Enjoy the session, and over to you guys.
Great, thanks Caroline. So welcome everyone to the Digital Marketing Institute and my humble abode. Good to have everyone here today. I am Richard Hegarty. I work here as Learning and Transformation Specialist. So my role today is to facilitate the webinar at DMI. My role is to work with enterprise businesses to help implement their digital training strategy. So today we've got a really exciting webinar coming up. We've got two very well-rounded, knowledgeable subject matter experts that you'll be hearing from shortly. And really kind of at a high level, we're going to cover, well, big data, new mindset, a loaded title, and we're going to unpack that today. And we'll be looking at challenges for banks, fintech, culture, mindset, running a number of polls as well. And please do ask as many questions that you have. We'll be answering them throughout, and at the end we'll have a Q&A session as well. So really excited to get started with it. Hope you really enjoyed. I'm going to hand you over to the subject matter expert to start with, Jonathan. So I'll hand it across to yourself, Jonathan.
Thanks, Richard. Super. And hello, everybody. So the first thing I want to really start with here is a point of view and get into the kind of the detail for established financial services. And then I'm going to invite Sadia to respond to my kind of provocations. So the first thing is really about connecting with customers. And connecting with customers is beyond products. It sounds really obvious to say that. And I know as a service designer what it takes to kind of create a product. It takes a phenomenal amount of effort. I really should have a great big word "but" at the top of this page, and that is, but people don't buy what you do. They buy why you do it. And you can see here that 73%, that's 3/4 of consumers who believe that brands have a responsibility to do more than just generate a profit. And I think I'm starting to kind of see that coming through with what's called B Corp. And B Corp is this kind of having a greater purpose. I think for the established financial services organizations, it's about saying, what is our manifesto? Why do we really exist? I think we're inevitably going to be talking about coronavirus throughout this kind of session today. But I think we've seen some of the kind of key messages from a range of financial services providers about saying they're being there for us. My own bank has said they're there for me. They've said it in the messaging point of view, but I haven't seen that backed up by any specific kind of actions. It's reassuring to hear it, but the proof is actually kind of in the pudding itself.
Jonathan, what about, when we consider transformation? There's a lot of talk when we hear digital transformation, quite kind of means different things to people, a loaded, broad term. But what about when we think about FS organizations? What are some of the other kind of main themes for these traditional FS organizations to consider?
Well, I think it's about digital transformation. For many, has been about digitization of processes. What they've had is manual kind of forms, very much centered on kind of a relationship with an individual in a branch. And what those kinds of organizations have had to do is digitize those processes. So instead of filling in a physical paper form and bringing it to a branch, it's now something as kind of a self-serve. And I think those things have ended up being almost what the customer expects, but also then they're seen as kind of an efficiency measure, because there's been kind of lots of overhead and cost within the business. So the way to reduce that is to digitize. I think digital transformation is really kind of concerned with two big areas that we're going to spend all the time on today, and that is around the kind of the use of data and also culture through the whole organization. So if I was in the shoes of an established business today and thinking, well, what's kind of stopping us from doing this larger digital transformation thing, I think it's and it's a short list, but not introducing risk. Changing products and services is a risk, and I think established businesses inherently don't like risk and don't want to bring it in. They don't want the operating model to be about serving customers in many ways, because that can, in a legacy business, appear complex. I think I see it myself, on platforms like LinkedIn. There's an absolute ton of information on things like AI and machine learning, but actually organizations don't know what it is or really how to use it. And having legacy services means it's not an API first style organization. And I think these businesses, they look at kind of what's going on in the fintech world and feel like they've got to play catch up business. And they spend a lot of energy kind of doing that. And I think when I'm talking about these kinds of stages, I think we've got the kind of established financial services business. It's not that they're doing anything kind of wrong. It's because they're really focused on the kind of traditional values of quality, and that makes them super cautious. Then what we've got is these fintech challenges, and that's what I think a lot of people consider. There's many of them, and I'm sure we've all got one or two of them on our own phone. And what these fintech challenges do is they provide a much faster and improved experience, but fundamentally they're providing the same service as the established organizations. It's still kind of normal retail banking or saving. There's nothing different. Whereas a third wave organization is one who's created disruption. And that disruption is about fundamentally saying, this is our manifesto, this is what we stand for, this is our purpose, this is why we're doing this. They really believe and are driven by that, and even kind of challenge the fintech challenges. And a couple of them that kind of come to mind are these new third wave types like Snoop or Gretel. They're on the side of the consumer, and they're fundamentally looking at saying, well, this is how the established financial services organizations have had a relationship with consumers to date, and we believe that could be significantly improved. And I think they are the types of businesses which is what the established financial services companies are probably worrying about. How do we get to them when we're not even at the level of the fintechs? So if you kind of pull it apart and think about data and mindset, for established businesses, they've got these enormous data lakes. They've got more data than I think in financial services, probably than any other category. But as a kind of a service or a product designer, that's inaccessible to them. Whereas on the fintechs, what they've got is these kind of loyal subscribed customers, but no data whatsoever. Whereas the third wave organizations, what they do is they're about plugging into many providers through APIs, and they create dynamic products. They use data kind of at the heart of the product design itself. If we're to think about like the culture and the mindset of those organizations, like I was saying, I think established financial services businesses are about being really cautious. That rapid change feels like it introduces a risk. Whereas in fintechs, it's all about the agile mindset. So they've got this kind of, what are we doing in this sprint? How are we testing and learning and improving on an ongoing basis? And that kind of product, development. Whereas like the third wave, so it almost forgets that whole concept of kind of agile and technology. It gets in the shoes and on the side of the customer and says, how are we going to kind of entirely disrupt the category itself? And I think this is what I've started to think about for those established businesses. It's not about playing catch up. So it's not about like looking at kind of, one of those many kind of fintech retail banks on your phone and saying, why is our UX not as good? Why haven't we got these couple of features? It's about creating these entire new services, and established businesses effectively just leapfrogging the fintechs and behaving like these third wave style organizations.
Jonathan, just one question comes to mind there. So when you consider, you mentioned a number of times these established financial services being quite cautious in embracing, maybe the usage of data and technology. So they're kind of risk averse, but for good reason, right? They're highly regulated institutions that can huge costs at error. So, I mean, is it with that in mind, are they some real challenges, or is that just a kind of mindset or culture kind of risk averse organization, or is that really providing barriers for them to enter into this faster, more quicker paced digitalization?
Well, I think there's two things with that. I think the first is, and I'm sure many people listening right now will see that there's kind of an us and them kind of operation with technology within the established businesses, and kind of product and product marketing as two separate teams entirely. And to deliver kind of the new products that are required, there can't be an us and them culture. It work together as a single team. And I think the way to kind of go about that is to take a set of people from both organizations, and do what Steve Jobs did years ago. Go and sit in another space, stick a pirate flag up if that's your thing, and go and build one entire new service and get that kind of culture and that mindset working with that particular kind of group of people. And once that becomes established, bring that back in and let that infiltrate the main business. I don't think for such large and established organizations, trying to just wholesale change that culture of people working together can happen quick enough to create the new services that are kind of required.
Okay.
I've got a couple of big things here that I want to put to Sadir, and these are my kind of core provocations. So the first is that established providers have got these sizable, absolutely enormous data lakes, but they're really, they're difficult to access or use in product design. I think the one thing that comes to mind with that is Netflix. So Netflix makes all of the data available via APIs to product designers, so they can literally create new interfaces that are built on data. They can kind of prototype it and test it, and when it's working, they can actually like publish this thing. It kind of goes around the whole kind of concept and strategy phase, and that's about having the right kind of environment, the right kind of behaviors in the business, and having kind of learning engines that are able to kind of take that data and automatically, rather than the traditional kind of spreadsheet and really complicated pivot tables with analysts poring over segmentation data as to what customers are doing, it's about having that machine engine making those choices.
How does security though come in relation to that? Like, security is going to be kind of main issue when you're looking at your data lakes, surely.
It is. I think security is kind of often used as a reason as to why not actually do something. But I think here it's really about that kind of ways of working between teams and what they can do, because the product team, all they need to do is have like a read-only access into that data. It's not like they're trying to kind of manipulate it in any way. And I think that comes down to core relationships with technologists and product management. And I think historically, especially in these kind of more legacy businesses, and also I've seen that within pharmaceutical, they are two very separate teams. And until they kind of come together, they'll recognize that the compliance and security are just kind of methods of slowing things down, as opposed to, well, of course it has to be secure. That's kind of like a hygiene factor, but not the excuse. The second kind of provocation here is, I think everyone probably recognizes it from the chat so far, is around culture. And the culture is traditional. I think with the amount of kind of home working and people having to kind of adopt to kind of different ways, different types of kind of team environments, it's probably it's been kind of forced upon people But what I've seen is you could walk into one of the kind of, you know, established businesses and go and point at an area, a group of desks and people who are the digital team, you know, and they've got the knowledge, they've got the kind of the vision, they understand the kind of the right kind of culture and ways of working. But it's really restricted to this group of kind of experts, if that's what we want to call them, and they know how to work together, but the rest of the organization kind of carries on. And you know, whilst they might have this kind of vision, they might have a greater purpose, they really struggle to kind of develop the culture to activate that social manifesto. And I think, you know, these two things, I think, are the core reasons why, if we just jump back mentally to that kind of leapfrog model, they're the kinds of things why established financial organizations are not making the switch into those kind of third wave organizations.
But I mean, when we're looking at the banks, are they not starting to do that at the moment, making that kind of move away? I know that you've got your kind of strong digital hub and everything sits outside of that. You know, we're working with some of the biggest banks globally, and there's certainly, although they're lagging in their skills and kind of that digital transformation, there appears to be a big appetite to kind of move forward. So what's your thoughts on that? Are they starting to do that now, do you think?
I think they are, but I think what's kind of shocked them into it is the improvement in the actual customer experience from the fintechs. And I think what you can see from a whole range of organizations at the moment is how they are developing better experiences. But what they're not is better services. They are still, you know, fundamentally the same kind of propositions. What they are is more accessible and faster. And what I'm talking about is, should you go and develop new propositions with a ring-fence team that fundamentally, you know, maybe at odds with the traditional business? I think it's, you know, it's good to kind of play catch up to the fintechs. And we all know, like I was saying at the beginning, developing products is really hard, digital products. By the time you've spent that kind of 12 months going through, you know, a whole kind of set of design and agile build, you will already be behind again. And I think, you know, it's commendable to be getting on with being more digital, but I think there's a better opportunity to step back and say, but how are we going to create these new propositions, not just fundamentally improve our user experience?
Okay, very good.
I think Caroline's now got a poll to ask everybody.
Yeah, so we've got a poll coming up here now, so please do, we're going to launch the poll now in a moment, so please do take part. We'd love to hear your responses. How often do you see these challenges stopping your organization progressing to third wave? So I'd be interested to see. We've got a large audience today from quite a mixture of organizations in the financial services, so we'll let people input their answers there, and we'll be able to pull that and have a look and see what people think generally, or what's their experience. So that'll be interesting to do. So we have a couple of polls as we go through. We obviously had the first one about the skills assessment, another one now, and we'll have another couple as we progress through the presentation. Okay, interesting.
No nevers.
Yeah.
Yeah, line share and between frequently and sometimes. I mean, it would be really great, and we can, maybe people want to write some questions for towards the end of the session. It would be great to dig into, is it more on the data side, which is creating the challenge and access into creating, you know, more innovative products, or is it more on the kind of culture side and changing those kinds of ways of working? It would be really interesting to kind of pull into that. So with these particular two provocations, what I'd like to do now is hand over to my colleague Sadia to provide a response to these two provocations. Well, just
Brilliant. Thanks, Jonathan. So Sudhir will come in now. I'll stay with you. And hey, Sudhir.
Hello. 1 second. Let me just try
Take
and.
time, yeah. So we're gonna. I'll just keep talk to the audience while you're getting set up there. We're going to start moving into now data and cultural response, and we'll hear from Sudhir, our second subject matter expert on the webinar today.
Can you see my screen
so,
now? Yeah.
Yeah, we can see your screen. No problem. Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Fantastic. Thanks very much, Jonathan. I think those are some brilliant provocations there. First of all, my name is Sudhir Puligundla, and I'm really excited to be here to bring some of my experiences and lessons learned in many transformation programs that I've been involved with, predominantly with banks and insurance companies in the UK and Ireland region. And absolutely, Jonathan, I think the kind of things that you pointed out do resonate quite a lot in most of the engagements that I've had. And yeah, so let's dive into it and see if I'm able to answer some of those questions. And obviously, like the guy said, feel free to kind of put your questions and comments in the comments box. Will I go ahead, Richard?
Yeah, you just change to the next slide there, and I'll let you kind of control. So. Okay, so in God we trust, all others must bring data. So W. Edwards Deming. So points to the importance of data. Sudhir, why do banks, why should they operate differently when it comes to data? What's your thoughts on that?
Sure. It's a great quote, Richard, that you brought up. I think the more important question, I think, is, yes, there's all this data, but what do we do with this data, right? And people seem to have listened to this quote, like the amount of data that's available these days is phenomenal and growing exponentially. But what can banks do? And in order to answer that question, when Jonathan was talking to me about this idea of these provocations, I was thinking about where did banks come from and where are they going, and I'm trying to depict the different worlds that they were in. Right, so just follow me with this slide here. So I wanted to talk about, banks obviously had their genesis in the physical world of branches and physical cash and all the tangible stuff. And like Jonathan mentioned, with the advent of online services and internet, things got digitized. And basically what happened was they just got transferred. The products and services that were born in the past just got transferred into different channels, online channels, let's say, and processes which evolved over a long period of time got replicated, right? Not maybe simplified a little bit, but mostly replicated into newer channels. Data, a lot of data was captured in the physical world, and because of the new technologies and new opportunities that are available, lots of data gets generated these days. But if you think about the true digital world that we are in today, I mean, the kind of capabilities that we have, the kind of technologies that we have are very different. They're fundamentally different, allowing organizations to completely rethink how they want to approach customers, how they want to kind of provide products and services and things like that, right? So, and this data that's captured and generated over a long period of time, banks have been in existence for almost 300-400 years. There's an enormous amounts of data that they can leverage to create exceptionally brilliant services to customers, right? So in the true digital world, what we want to see, or what the customers are expecting banks and organizations to do, is personalized products and services to suit their specific needs. I mean, today we have, like I said, banks have the data and we have the tools and techniques to go after micro segmentation of customers, right? To create specific products and services that are tailor-made for each individual or smaller groups of customers. Processes need to be completely reimagined. What we couldn't do like 5, 7, 10 years ago are possible today. Like, there's the concepts of digital identity, there's concepts of, cloud technologies, open banking, microservices and APIs, wearables, AI and ML. There's so many things that we talk about that fundamentally can change how these products are created, offered, serviced, and looked after, and all that kind of stuff. So that is where banks need to focus on. And then when it comes to data, how do we it's no longer enough just to capture and generate data. It's about leveraging that data. Otherwise, to answer your question, Richard, it's like having an entire library of books available to you, but you don't know how to read, right? So what's the use of having all that data? So that's where my thoughts are.
So the banks have this enormous wealth of data, but I think, are they using it is the question in the right way? And I suppose when we talk about personalization, and I know we spoke about this before, I think an equal pet hate for us is, at a granular level, when you're speaking to your bank and they're asking you over and over again for your details, who you are, little moments like that just make you feel like, they're not living up to where the bar has been set and the expectations the customer has, even though they have all of this wealth of data. So I suppose, like, are they truly using it, and maybe how can they?
Sure. So absolutely. I mean, I was in a few projects and programs where we were talking to customers, and customers constantly complain, I've been banking with this bank for 20 years. And when I go in to apply for a next product like a loan or a mortgage, the first thing they ask me is, who are you? Or, they want these details from me multiple times. They should know everything about me. I've been with them for these many years, and yet they treat me as a stranger, kind of thing. These kind of perceptions are out there quite a lot. So in terms of how organizations or banks use this data, right? In my experience, I've looked at 3 types of organizations, Richard. So if I move on to the next one. So level 1 is where it's pretty basic capabilities. In this case, the driver is regulatory compliance. Yes, we're a bank, so we need to collect some data. And because we're collecting data, there is obviously security and privacy and quality and data governance type issues that we need to look at. So they're just doing the bare minimum to capture the kind of data that's needed for them. Banks have always collected data for their internal purposes. Obviously, KYC purposes, to look at profitability, affordability, credit decisioning, and these kind of purposes. They were never really collected in the sense to create great customer experiences or create new products and services, or that mindset never existed in the past, but that is changing, right? So level 1 is pretty basic data capture kind of a level of organizations. Level 2 is more where there's a little bit more capability in terms of analyzing that data, trying to look at business intelligence, for reporting purposes, basically. But what we need companies to move towards is level 3, which is an outward focus to use data as for competitive intelligence, for personalization, for creating these great experiences for customers, trying to understand them, having that 360 view of customers at the fingertips of every person who is touching customers, through services. So it's level 3 that, and I'm not saying that there's a clear demarcation between these levels. Banks operate at different levels to different levels of maturity. So if you think about it, level 2 is analysis focused. It's almost like after the fact, looking back at things, trying to determine what happened and why it happened and that kind of stuff. And level 3 is more putting an analytics lens on it, using modeling and prediction and all that kind of latest and greatest stuff to position ourselves for the future, position the banks for the future, right? So there you go. Those questions, what happened is answered at level 1, but how to make things happen is the level 3. So you might ask, how can banks move from level 1 to level 3? And this is where culture plays in quite a lot, but also what I call them the 5 R's in your arsenal, right? I love alliterations just to kind of make them stick in people's minds. So you want that real leadership intent to kind of go from level 1 to level 3, be very data oriented, and leaders need to set the right example in the way they make decisions, in the way they communicate things, in the way they empower people and all that kind of stuff. Then you need the right kind of strategy. And I said relevant data strategy because, yes, you see business strategies all over, in all organizations where data just takes probably one slide of a slide deck. But you need focused data strategy with clear diagnosis of where things are and where you want to move and how do we and a plan of action to get us there. And then the other things, obviously, looking at your skills, the tools and techniques and platforms that are available, and the process and things like that, Richard. So yeah, that's where I see data used in different forms in different organizations.
We should say as well, we'll be sharing the slides with everybody as well, so I'm sure there'll be lots of useful information for people to have at the end of the session. It's great. Thanks, Sudhir.
No, absolutely. So if we think about, how do we actually make it more relevant to the conversation? So where is it that certain organizations are, and where do they want to move? With respect to data, companies need to stop treating data as just another resource. Just like you have your human talent, you have your infrastructure, you have your process, and you have data, and it's not completely thought through as a competitive advantage type resource. So companies need to move from using data just as another resource to actually making data work for you to create a competitive advantage. Okay. The second thing is data being locked up. In the 3 levels that I talked about. If you just collect data and lock it up because, like you said, security is a huge issue, but people are making lots of progress towards robust security, but also giving access for the right purposes and stuff like that. So data democratization is a major concept these days, right? So the right data available to the right teams at the right time to make the right decisions is really important these days to kind of catch up to the challenges that there are fight the challenges that they're facing these days. Then analytics, if you're using analytics just for reporting, just for keeping your senior management happy on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, then that's not the right use of data. You need in order to become a very data-driven organization, every decision within the organization needs to be data-driven, and analytics need to be used as a decision-making tool. And finally, think about org structures as well, right? Many companies have data teams, but they're a siloed data team that's just looking at data just open to them, and they have the tools or the skills, and they're not available to everyone. So I was working with a company where, for us to kind of get some access to data, you had to raise a request, and that would go into a queue, and that would take like 5 working days by the time you get a results of the report back and things like that. Instead, what companies need to move into is having specialists embedded within their product teams, so it becomes truly cross-functional with strategy, design, technology, and data working together to solve problems, right? And finally, I recently attended a webinar where a data scientist from a pharmaceutical company was saying they wanted to move from just hiring data scientists to becoming a truly data science company. And I don't think banks are any different. Banks, like Jonathan said, banks probably have the richest data sets on any customer today. And they truly have to become a data science company using all the latest and greatest in terms of tools, techniques, and talent to kind of drive that data-driven culture.
Could you give us maybe an example, like a live example from your own experiences?
Yeah, I was thinking about this. So one of my recent engagements was where we were asked to form a small team to reimagine the loans journey for small and medium enterprise customers. Okay, so the problem statement given to us was, yeah, we are servicing our SME customers through multiple channels, but we want to reduce our cost to serve, but also improve customer experience and enable staff with better process and things like that. So I wanted to give this as an example because this was a heavily data-driven conversation. This particular bank was brilliant in terms of providing us with, on day one, they had all the regular historic data available to us in terms of customer types, channel types, all of those things that you see on screen there. But and we were analyzing all this data, trying to kind of look at what was the most most used channel, or what channels suited what types of customers and things like that. But I wanted to kind of emphasize the importance of unstructured or qualitative data as well. So in this particular example, the company again was brilliant to line up 15 customers for us to go and talk to. So I drove up and down the country, talking to farmers, talking to cafe owners, talking to kind of sole trader, these kind of people, trying to really understand what is it that they're looking for, what are their expectations, pain points, and all of that. And so back at base, we pulled all this data together, and it only took us a short span of 6 weeks to have the interviews done, speaking to customers and speaking to colleagues as well, which is like bank staff in branches, in call centers, in business teams, credit decisioning, all these areas, synthesizing all that information and coming up with some insights which wouldn't have been possible without access to those customers, talking to those customers, or looking at all of these different angles. I added voice of community as well there. While we did not do this as part of this engagement, I wanted to kind of emphasize today, we can look at the social media chatter about the services that you're providing, what's going on, what are people talking about, and being proactive and trying to solve some of that will be really useful. So the insights that we came up with, like you said, every customer that we spoke to said, please show me that you know me. Like, I've been with you forever. Like, don't ask me for the same questions again and again. Respect my time, be my trusted advisor. All of these things that I mentioned on that slide there, these were the things that really came out and drove our thought process in terms of how to redefine the new process. So yeah, once you look at qualitative and quantitative data, it all helps in that process.
That's brilliant.
So, okay, moving on, quick checklist, what are some of those simple things that your audience can do tomorrow or today to see if they have the right thinking in terms of data? And again, based on experience, these questions really make people think. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but basically, do we have, are we seeking data at the right times to make the right decisions? What is our talent gaps in relation to data? How are we structured for cross-functional teams? And is the data available to us? Is it democratized, or do I have to raise requests and wait forever? All those kind of things are simple things that you could check within your own organizations to see where you stand in that process. Okay.
Right. So culture. So I mean, we're now going to explore culture concerning big data and a new mindset, and see how important having the correct culture to implement changes that are going to be required is really significant. So I think we've got another good quote to share. So culture eats strategy for breakfast. Peter Drucker's famous quote. Culture more important than strategy. So Sudhir, can you expand on that for us on the importance?
Absolutely. This is to Jonathan's second provocation, right? So yeah, I mean, this is one of the most famous quotes from Peter Drucker. But in my view, like, both are equally important, right? So, you have a great culture and no strategy. It's like, la la land, right? So you have no plan of action. You don't know where you're going. It doesn't work. And similarly, if you have a great strategy and not a conducive culture to implement that strategy, then you're struggling as well. So I think it's a really important to kind of look at both of these in when you're talking about changing your organization for the better.
Yeah, because I think when we think about transformation, we think about change, right? And what's required for change is mindset, and culture is the fuel to change mindset. So you can really get the sense of how critical, not as alone, but combined with strategy, how critical it is. And the process then for that as well, that maybe you can walk us through.
I completely agree with your slide there, Richard. Transformation needs all these enablers to all work in tandem to get you from current state to future state, right? And I know we're specifically focusing on culture on this one, but it needs to be coupled with the right kind of strategy and the right kind of operating model. And anyone who's involved in transformation programs need to look at these things holistically and have the right kind of leadership intent to drive the organization in that direction as well. So coming back to banks, right? When you think of a bank, for me at least, like, incumbents and challenger banks, they're known for different things, right? So when you think about incumbents, like we were talking about how banks have been in existence forever, scale and stability and these kind of things come to mind. And when you think about new challenger banks, they're known for very different things: speed and convenience and innovation. And for some reason, these seem to be very mutually exclusive. You don't associate speed and convenience with your traditional banks, and scale and stability and these kind of things with challenger banks. And I think the tenets that made traditional banks successful in the past seem to be the ones that are impeding their ability to compete with these newer banks. And to Jonathan's point earlier, absolutely. I mean, culture and ability. He said traditional culture, because they've seen things being done in a certain way for many years, and suddenly we're faced with this new challenges of speed, convenience, and innovation hitting us all from all different corners, and banks are struggling to see how to respond to that, right?
So how can they, Sudhir, when you how can the banks move towards this speed, convenience, and innovation? What are some of the tactical things they can actually do?
Absolutely. So the how to kind of get to those things. When you think about speed is there's two ways I look at speed, right? So one is the speed that is exposed to customers in terms of the speed of service, or the speed with which new products and features are released to the market, right? So, and that's one level of speed. Internally, there is a concept of speed as well, in terms of the decisioning speed, or the business processing speed, or the speed with which IT development is done. So speed needs a really thorough look at how you're organized, internally, to enable a speedy service to your customers. And the things that I mentioned there they all form part of that. Again, culturally, it's very important to kind of embrace speed as part of your ways of working. Velocity needs to be front and center of every thought process, of every conversation that you have. Otherwise, the windows of opportunity are very small these days, and there's somebody else who wants to kind of get there before you, and you struggle. When it comes to convenience, again, it's empowering your staff, empowering your teams internally to provide the best convenience for your customers. And that means, are we allowing our teams to experiment with new service models? Is there a holistic view of customers available to all our staff? So in the SME loan example that I talked about, when someone walks into a branch versus calling a call center versus doing it online, how does the experience differ? Are we putting them through multiple levels of documentation, waiting periods, and all that kind of stuff? How does it kill convenience and experience, and all that kind of stuff needs to be looked at. Again, culture on its own may not be enough here, because you need the right tools, and this is about the right data being available as well. Data democratization comes into picture here as well. And then finally, innovation is all about the mindset again, isn't it? Does your leadership really have the intent to allow you the time, space, money, effort, anything that's needed to innovate, experiment? Do you have the right kind of tools and platforms available for you to quickly conduct experiments and things like that? So these are some of the things. And unless you have a culture that's conducive to make these things happen, banks are going to struggle. And that's what we're seeing in some of these things.
So they really need to kind of bring, how does this all come together then to kind of form your culture? And just we should keep conscious of the time as well. I know we've lots of great more stuff to get through, but we're so just to be fair that in mind. But just in terms of the culture, bringing all that together and bringing it back to culture, maybe be interesting.
For me, Richard, from my experience, again, culture falls squarely in the leadership's responsibilities section. So you cannot expect culture to formulate itself. You need to intentionally drive culture. And the way it's done is people, culture, people say it's the unstated assumptions and beliefs that drive how people behave and do things, right? But what people do depends on how they feel, and that depends on what they see. And the seeing part is where leadership needs to play a very big role. And so I won't go into each of those, but leadership needs to set the real examples of what culture they want to drive, in terms of investments, in terms of communications, in terms of rewarding and penalizing the right and wrong behaviors, and doing it with honesty, integrity, and consistency. And that should drive that feeling of empowerment, motivation to experiment, alignment with the direction of the organization, customer centricity, innovation, all of these kind of things. People should feel empowered to do that, which then translates into passion, ownership, and accountability, hopefully allowing them to kind of do only work that is valuable, questioning the status quo, asking for the right tools and technologies, being cost conscious, and all of that. So when you think about culture, and these are some of the, getting the wrong culture is obviously going to cause huge problems. The organizational immunity is going to kick in to stop any change from happening, and you don't want that when you're looking to move towards challenging some of these. So again, looking at a checklist, just think about what you're doing today. If it's not aligned to some organizational goal or customer value, should you be doing it? Can you do some cheaper experiment before you invest a lot of money? Do you have all the skills available? All of these things are quick things that you could pick up within your organizations today and see if you have the right things. If not, what do you need to do to move the dial in that direction?
Brilliant.
So
thanks so much, Sudhir. That's really interesting. I think lots of thought-provoking, lots of questions coming through that we'll be getting to as well in the Q&A. So it's Jonathan, I guess you're going to...
Back to Jonathan then, yeah.
Thanks, Sudhir.
No worries. Jonathan, you're on mute, I think.
There we go. I knew there would be a fatal error in a webinar today, and it was myself. Wonderful. Yeah, thanks for that. I think that was absolutely fantastic. Phenomenal amount of content. I'll just canter through this. As Richard said earlier, we're going to make this available so people can read through in more detail. One of the things which can happen, I think, when you kind of go through all of that kind of data and the mindset piece, is to think about, where to focus, what matters, that kind of prioritization. And, with this, it's like, well, where are we today? It's not about the kind of, starting at one level and immediately maturing absolutely everything. And I think here it's about understanding where on this particular type of scale we think, think where the business is at today. Are we? And I think, for the most part, I think from the previous poll, it feels like many of the businesses today are at the kind of emerging stage. There's some data, maybe there's some barriers in the business, and that's going through in that kind of single channel rather than more of a connected or multi-channel kind of customer experience. And I think with this, if we're to get into more of a tool approach, I don't know how familiar people are with Mars and what Mars means. It stands for, when we're looking at our capabilities, is it missing? Is it ad hoc? Is it repeatable, or is it systematic? And you can see there, that's from the we don't do this at all, right through to the we've got a process defined and we do this and follow it all of the time. And when you think about wanting to document how we're doing that maturity of the capabilities, what we need to get into is a capability map. So we can address all of the capabilities. And first of all, you need to kind of document that as is state. It's what's going on in the business today. So you can see, and I think this is pretty common, especially in a lot of established financial service organizations, that the use of web analytics. There is web analytics, but it's really kind of what you might consider vanity metrics. It's how many visitors have we got? What time of day are they visiting? What products are they viewing? That's why it's just kind of ad hoc. We're doing it, but people occasionally kind of dive into that. I think once that kind of vision is established and that manifesto about what we want the organization to be like, we can kind of paint the picture of the to be, that's the tomorrow state. And what you can see in that example is not all capabilities are being matured. It's about being highly selective, being really focused on these are the particular elements. And obviously under the hood of that, there's a huge amount of data. I use this type of visual capability mapping, with many organizations. And whilst it looks kind of incredibly simple, just having a series of boxes with some color labels, it tells the story of what's going on today and what needs to happen to move into that kind of, organization of tomorrow. If you want to get started, with that, it's relatively straightforward. You start by creating that capability framework. What are all of the dimensions that are required by the organization? That's just going to be a really long list in Excel. Then think about how you kind of cluster those individual capabilities into groups. Get a kind of three groups, or almost usually don't work together in harmony to conduct your as-is assessments. That's the technologies group, service group, and products, and also operation. And together you'll be able to kind of do that maturity of where it's at, and then you can do that kind of gap analysis against your vision to say, well, these are the things that really matter. And that's when you can get into kind of creating that roadmap, because you're not going to mature all of them capabilities. But what you can do is, back to the data, you can focus on very specific capabilities that are going to drive better data insight. And by working together in that kind of cluster of technology, product marketing, and operations, you can start driving the cultural mindset through the actual organization itself. And that's the act of actual doing. So we've got one kind of quick final poll here. I think Caroline's hopefully going to just pop that on screen.
Brilliant. So encourage everyone to take part in the poll, it'd be great. We'll be able to see some results. We've all documented capability map and maturity plan. We have a well-documented capability map and maturity plan. So let's see what the take is on that. And we're just done well. We've come to time on the Q&A, so well done for the two lads getting through all of that content on the time. I think we've 2 minutes to go, so that was pretty good. You should probably see the results, don't have one. Okay. Interesting. What's your thoughts on that, lads?
Well, I mean, I think what if I was to run another poll right now and ask everybody listening, do you have some type of digital transformation program in progress? I suspect it would be close to 100%. And the way of activating that kind of transformation program is to get into the capability mapping piece itself, because that's how you can kind of say, well, this is the prioritized set of capabilities we're going to mature and how we're going to work together to do it. So it's kind of quite surprising that, well over half were saying we don't have one of these things. And I think, as a senior digital marketeer, it can be your responsibility to familiarize yourself with such tools and techniques and to kind of drive that change through the business yourselves.
Absolutely, and just to mention on that, and I suppose the capability roadmap and plan, and the skills training around digital marketing or digital sales within inside that overall plan. Caroline mentioned at the beginning, and I know there's more people have joined since that. So, we run a skills assessment here at DMI, which is a really useful starting point to kind of understand the skills, the capabilities, the gaps within the organization as it relates to digital marketing, and can be a starting point then to see where to focus your time, your budgets in upskilling. So we've lots of people who wanted information on that, but if you weren't here at the beginning for that poll, if you just type in get in touch, we'll make sure you have all the information on how you can assess the capabilities from a skills perspective across your organization for the sales and marketing function. So maybe just type get in touch and we'll follow up with the information required, just to mention that. But thanks so much for getting through all that content in the time that we had. I think you both did an excellent job, and it was a lot and some really thought-provoking